Before I tell you about the absolute train wreck that followed and the look on their faces when reality hit them, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. When I walked into the house that evening, my dad was standing in the middle of the kitchen like he had just been elected mayor of the world. He didn't even look up from the small rectangle of paper in his hand. The TV was blaring some evening game show in the background, but the energy in the room was entirely focused on him. My mom was sitting at the worn-out oak dining table, her hands clasped together, breathing heavily as if she had just run a marathon. My younger brother, Cameron, was leaning against the refrigerator, a smug, untouchable smirk plastered across his face. "You're just in time," my dad said. His tone was strange. It was bright, theatrical, and dripping with an arrogance I hadn't heard from him in years. On the counter next to him was his phone, screen unlocked and glowing, displaying a local news article about a massive state lottery winner. A stock photo of someone holding an oversized check filled the top half of the screen. My dad waved the small lottery ticket in the air like it was absolute proof of gravity. He looked me dead in the eye, his chest puffed out. "Guess what happened today?" I took my work bag off my shoulder slowly, feeling the familiar exhaustion of a 12-hour shift seeping into my bones. "You won." "Damn right I did." He laughed. It was a loud, booming, confident laugh. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him since before the financial troubles began. It was the laugh of a man who firmly believed all his problems had just miraculously vanished into thin air. For the past 3 years, I had been the one keeping this family afloat. I paid the mortgage. I paid the electric bill. I kept the water running. I did it quietly, not because he asked, but because he would rather let the house go into foreclosure than admit he needed his eldest son to bail him out. I called the thousands of dollars I transferred every month help with groceries, so he could protect his fragile ego and pretend it was just a temporary rough patch. He always accepted my money with a tight, resentful expression, like a man swallowing bitter medicine. But tonight, the medicine had apparently been cured. He stepped forward and slapped the lottery ticket down on the kitchen island. "See this?" I leaned over slightly but didn't pick it up yet. The overhead fluorescent light cast a harsh glare on the glossy paper. "I don't need your help anymore," he said. The words weren't angry. They were triumphant. He sounded like a man announcing he had finally paid off a blood debt to a loan shark. "That's good," I said quietly, keeping my face perfectly neutral. He pointed a thick finger at his phone screen. "Jackpot was announced this morning. Numbers match. Every single one." Then his voice changed. The triumph morphed into something cruel and cold. "You know what else that means?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him. "It means I'm done with this whole situation." He gestured vaguely toward me, toward the front door, toward the quiet, suffocating arrangement that had existed between us for years. "I don't need your dirty money in my house anymore. Get out." Dirty. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. My job wasn't illegal. I was a corporate consultant. I worked brutal 80-hour weeks, analyzing spreadsheets and restructuring failing businesses. But to him, because I didn't work with my hands, because I wore a suit, I had sold out. Yet my dirty salary was the only thing keeping a roof over his head. "I'm serious," he sneered, picking the ticket up again and shaking it at me. "You can move out. Tonight. I've got everything covered now. You're a grown man anyway." I looked at my mother. She averted her eyes, staring intently at the salt shaker on the table. She wasn't going to defend me. She never did. Cameron just chuckled from the fridge. "Okay," I said. I set my bag down by the door and walked over to the island. "Can I see it?" He handed me the ticket with the obnoxious confidence of a child showing off a gold medal. The paper felt ordinary, thin, slightly bent at the bottom corner. I looked at the 6 numbers printed in bold black ink. Then I looked again. Something felt off. My eyes drifted to the top right corner of the paper, near the barcode. I checked the date printed there. Then I glanced at his phone on the counter, scrolling past the headline of the news article to the dateline. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the humming silence of the kitchen. I tried to hold it in. I really did. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. But the sheer, poetic irony of the universe was too much. The laugh came out anyway. It wasn't loud, just a sudden, sharp burst of air escaping my lungs. My dad's expression hardened instantly, the arrogance replaced by defensive rage. "What's so funny?" I rubbed my forehead, still shaking my head, a bitter smile spreading across my face. Little did he know, this ticket was just the beginning of the end for him. But to understand why I didn't just walk out the door right then, to understand why I let him dig his own grave, you need to know how we got here. Growing up in our house meant understanding one fundamental rule. Cameron was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets lucky enough to orbit his brilliance. It didn't matter what I did, the spotlight was permanently fixed on my younger brother. I realized this early on, probably around middle school, when I brought home a straight-A report card and my dad barely grunted over his newspaper. The very next day, Cameron managed to score a single goal in a junior varsity soccer game, and my parents took the whole family out for an expensive steak dinner to celebrate his athletic genius. It was a pattern that only grew more toxic as we got older. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who got a part-time job at a hardware store when I was 16 just so I could buy my own clothes, while Cameron was handed a brand new credit card for his social life. The real breaking point in our childhood dynamic, the moment that truly cemented my place in the family hierarchy, happened right after my high school graduation. I had worked myself to the bone, studying late into the night, sacrificing weekends and parties to secure a partial scholarship to a decent university. My parents had always promised that there was a college fund set aside for both of us. It wasn't a massive fortune, but it was supposed to be enough to help with tuition and books. The week before I was supposed to move into my dorm, I sat down with my mom at the kitchen table to go over the finances. She looked incredibly uncomfortable, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. "Elijah, honey," she started, using that soft, placating voice she only used when she was about to deliver terrible news. "We need to talk about the college fund." My stomach tightened. "Okay, did the bank transfer go through?" She sighed, pressing her fingers to her temples. "The thing is, Cameron has been having a really hard time lately. His grades aren't great and he's just lost. Your father and I decided that he needs a gap year. A chance to travel, find himself, figure out his passions before he commits to college." I stared at her, the words processing slowly. A gap year. To travel. Yes, we're sending him to Europe for 6 months. It's an experiential learning program. "And how are you paying for that?" I asked, though my throat was suddenly dry, and I already knew the answer. She finally looked at me, her eyes defensive. "Elijah, you're so smart. You got that scholarship and you've always been so independent. You can take out student loans to cover the rest. Cameron needs this more than you do. We had to use the college fund for his program. All of it. They had drained my half of the fund to send my brother on a 6-month vacation across Europe because he was lost." I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just sat there, feeling a cold, heavy stone settle in the pit of my stomach. I nodded, stood up, and walked out of the room. From that day on, I worked 2 jobs throughout college. I took night classes. I barely slept. I graduated with honors and a mountain of student debt, while Cameron came back from Europe with nothing but a fake accent and a taste for expensive wine. The message was clear. My hard work was expected. His existence was celebrated. I was the safety net. He was the main event. Fast forward a few years. I was 25, living in a cramped apartment in the city, clawing my way up the corporate ladder at a prestigious consulting firm. I was good at my job. Really good. I had a knack for looking at a failing business model, finding the bleeding arteries of wasted money, and stitching them up. It was exhausting, brutal work, but it paid well, and I was entirely self-sufficient. Then the phone call came. It was a Tuesday night. I was buried under a pile of quarterly reports when my mom called, sobbing hysterically. Between the gasps and tears, I pieced together the disaster. My dad's small logistics business had gone under. Not just a bad quarter, but a complete and total collapse. The house I grew up in, the one they had mortgaged twice over, was on the brink of foreclosure. The bank was threatening to seize everything. "Elijah, you have to help us," she wept into the receiver. "We have nowhere else to go. Cameron is trying to start a new business. He can't be stressed with this right now. Please." Even then, in the middle of a family crisis, her priority was protecting Cameron's feelings. But they were my parents. The ingrained sense of duty, the desperate, lingering hope that maybe if I saved them, they would finally look at me the way they looked at him, overrode my common sense. I had just been offered a massive promotion at work. It meant relocating to the firm's Chicago office, a huge salary bump, and a clear path to partnership. It was everything I had been working toward. The next morning, I walked into my boss's office and turned it down. I requested to stay at the local branch, took a lateral move with heavier hours just to secure a consistent, higher performance bonus, and started wiring 60% of my paycheck to my parents' bank account every single month. I moved back to the suburbs to save on rent, renting a tiny, miserable room just a few miles from their house so I could keep an eye on things. That was when I first met Mr. Vance. I was visiting my parents to go over their overdue utility bills when a loud, aggressive knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find a tall, gaunt man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit holding a clipboard. He had the dead, tired eyes of a man who spent his life delivering bad news. "Robert here?" he asked, his voice like gravel. "He's not available," I said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me. "I'm his son." "Who are you?" "Vance. Collections." He didn't mince words. He held up a thick stack of papers. "Your father is severely delinquent. If we don't see a cashier's check for $12,000 by Friday, the foreclosure process officially begins. No more extensions." My jaw clenched. $12,000. It was nearly my entire savings, the money I had been hoarding to finally pay off the last chunk of my own student loans. "I'll handle it," I told Vance. He raised an eyebrow, looking at my inexpensive clothes and the beat-up Honda parked in the driveway. "Sure you will, kid. Friday at 5 p.m. I drained my savings account the next day. I paid the bank, paid Vance. I kept the lights on. And when I handed my dad the receipts, he didn't say thank you. He just snatched the papers from my hand, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I would have figured it out," he muttered, refusing to look at me. "I don't need you playing the hero." That was the beginning of the 3-year arrangement. I paid for his life, and in return, he resented me for reminding him of his failure. I became the bank, and my money, the money that kept a roof over his head, became dirty in his eyes simply because I was the one earning it. The financial drain was one thing, but the emotional toll of dealing with my family was a completely different kind of exhaustion. They had a way of twisting reality so that no matter what I did, I was always the villain, and Cameron was always the victim of circumstance. This dynamic was never more obvious than at our family's annual 4th of July barbecue. I had just finished working a 60-hour week and drove straight to my parents' house, exhausted, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. I walked into the backyard to find the grill going, beers flowing, and the extended family gathered around. Sitting in a lawn chair, holding court like a queen, was my Aunt Clara. Clara was my dad's sister, a woman who hid her vicious, judgmental nature behind a veneer of Southern hospitality and fake religious piety. She spotted me walking across the grass and immediately raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence," Clara crowed, waving a plastic cup of wine. "Elijah, still working yourself into an early grave for those corporate fat cats." I forced a tight smile. "Hi, Aunt Clara. Just busy." "Busy making money, I'm sure," she sniffed, turning to a cousin sitting next to her. "You know, it's a shame. Some people get so obsessed with their salary they forget what really matters. Family. Not everyone can be as grounded as our Cameron." I looked across the yard. Cameron was leaning against the fence, wearing a designer polo shirt I knew for a fact he couldn't afford, holding a beer and laughing loudly. Cameron is doing big things. My mom chimed in, rushing over to refill Clara's cup. He's putting together a pitch for an amazing new tech startup. He's an entrepreneur. Clara beamed. Exactly. Following his passion. Not just chasing a paycheck like some people. She shot me a pointed look. She loved to talk about money, constantly gossiping about who in the family was expecting an inheritance or who was heading for a messy divorce just to get a payout. To her, my steady job was a sign of a lack of ambition. I bit my tongue and walked over to the cooler to grab a water. As I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah, a trusted colleague at the firm. Hey, check your email. Julian just pitched the Alpha Phase restructuring model to the senior partners. My blood ran cold. Julian was a coworker I had considered a friend. We had spent the last 2 months brainstorming a revolutionary new predictive model for corporate restructuring. It was my brainchild, my ticket to the partnership I had delayed to help my parents. I pulled up my email and opened the attached file Sarah had secretly forwarded. It was my model. Every chart, every data point, but with Julian's name plastered across the title slide. I stepped away from the noise of the barbecue, slipping into the quiet hallway of the house. I dialed Julian's number. He answered on the second ring, sounding entirely too cheerful. Hey man, what's up? Julian said. You pitched the model, I said, my voice dangerously low. Without me. There was a brief pause, a moment of calculated hesitation. Listen, Elijah, the partners needed something fresh today. You weren't in the office. I had to take the initiative. Don't worry. I'll make sure you get some credit on the back end. You stole my work, Julian. Don't be dramatic, he scoffed. Besides, you've been so distracted lately with all your family drama. You weren't focused. I did what I had to do for the firm. I hung up the phone. I stood in the hallway of the house I was paying for, listening to my family praise the brother who contributed nothing, while a man I trusted stole the career I was sacrificing everything for. The betrayal stung, a sharp, cold knife between the ribs. But instead of marching into the office on Monday and screaming, I made a different choice. I didn't say a word. I started quietly downloading every email, every timestamped draft, every piece of evidence that proved the model was mine. I was learning a harsh lesson. Loyalty was a myth, and if you wanted to survive, you had to build your own leverage. If Julian's betrayal was a knife in the back, what my family did a few months later was the twist of the blade that finally severed my emotional ties to them. It was my 21st birthday. Most people celebrate turning 21 with massive parties, a night out at the bars, or at least a nice dinner with friends. I didn't expect much. Given the financial ruin I was actively managing for my parents, I knew a party was out of the question. But my dad had made one promise. Months ago, when I first started paying the mortgage, my old college car finally gave out. The transmission died, and it was cheaper to scrap it than fix it. I had been taking 2 buses and a train to get to the city for work ever since. It was a brutal commute. My dad, in a rare moment of guilt, had looked at me and said, "When you turn 21, I'll find a cheap used car at the auction. Nothing fancy, but it'll get you to the office. I owe you that much." It was the only thing I asked for. Just a reliable set of wheels to make the 80-hour work weeks slightly less agonizing. On the evening of my birthday, I took the train back to the suburbs, exhausted but feeling a tiny flicker of anticipation. I walked the 2 miles from the station to their house in the crisp autumn air. When I opened the front door, the house was dark. No lights, no smell of dinner cooking. I walked into the kitchen and found a single, hastily scribbled sticky note on the counter. Emergency with Cameron. At his apartment. There's leftover casserole in the fridge. Happy birthday. Mom. I stood in the dim kitchen, staring at the yellow square of paper. I didn't open the fridge. I took out my phone and called my mom. She answered after 5 rings, whispering loudly. Elijah? We can't talk loud. Where are you? I asked, my voice flat. We're at Cameron's. He's in a really bad place, honey. Chloe broke up with him this morning. He's completely devastated. We had to come over and make sure he's okay. Chloe. a girl he had been dating for barely 3 months. "It's my birthday, Mom," I said. I know, and I feel terrible, but your brother is falling apart. We'll celebrate next weekend, I promise." "What about the car?" I asked. The question felt pathetic leaving my mouth, but I needed to know. I needed to hear it. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. Then, a heavy sigh. "Elijah, about the car. Listen, Cameron was so depressed today. He was talking about dropping everything and giving up. Your father and we thought it would be best to get him out of the city. We used the money we saved for your car to book him a flight to Miami for a week. Just a healing trip. To clear his head." I stopped breathing. The kitchen felt like a vacuum. They took the money. Money they only had because I was paying all their other bills, and used it to send my 26-year-old brother on a beach vacation because he got dumped. "Elijah, are you there? Please try to understand. You're strong. You can handle the bus a little longer. Cameron is fragile." "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm strong." I hung up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the phone at the wall. I just stood there in the dark, the flickering street light casting long, hollow shadows across the room. Something inside me, some desperate, childish hope that I could earn their love through sacrifice, finally snapped. It didn't break with a loud crash. It just quietly dissolved into dust. I turned around, walked out the front door, and locked it behind me. I walked the 2 miles back to the train station in the dark. That night, sitting on a hard plastic seat on the late train back to my miserable rented room, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt a terrifying, absolute clarity. I was done being the victim. I was done being the safety net. It was time to start building my own empire, and I wasn't going to let any of them know until it was entirely too late. The clarity I found on my 21st birthday changed the way I operated. I kept paying the mortgage, not out of love but out of cold, calculated strategy. If I stopped paying, they would lose the house, and the fallout would be loud and messy. I needed time. I needed quiet. I needed to build my escape hatch. But I also needed to understand exactly what I was paying for. For years, the narrative was that my dad's logistics business had simply failed due to the economy. But the math never added up. The business had assets. It had equipment. It shouldn't have resulted in a personal debt so massive that it threatened foreclosure. One Sunday afternoon, while my parents were out at church and Cameron was sleeping off a hangover at his apartment, I let myself into their house. I went straight to my dad's dusty, cramped home office. He kept everything in a heavy, locked filing cabinet in the corner. I had seen him hide the key in a hollowed-out book on the shelf years ago. He wasn't nearly as clever as he thought he was. I unlocked the cabinet and started digging. I bypassed the old tax returns and utility bills, searching for the thick red folder I had caught him quickly shoving into the bottom drawer a few weeks prior. I found it buried beneath a stack of expired warranties. I sat down at the desk, opened the folder, and started reading. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a business loan. It wasn't a failed logistics contract. It was a lawsuit settlement and a massive line of credit taken out against the equity of the house. I flipped through the legal jargon, my eyes catching specific names. Cameron's name, and another name I recognized, Dylan. Dylan was Cameron's sleazy, fast-talking friend who claimed to be a lawyer, but spent most of his time hanging around dive bars looking for vulnerable clients. The documents outlined a catastrophic mess. 2 years before the house almost went into foreclosure, Cameron and Dylan had started a boutique investment firm, which was essentially an unlicensed, illegal crypto trading scheme. They had taken money from several private investors, promising massive returns, and lost absolutely everything. When the investors threatened to go to the police and have Cameron arrested for fraud, my dad panicked. Instead of letting Cameron face the consequences of his actions, my dad hired a real lawyer, settled with the investors out of court to keep them quiet, and took out a massive, ruinous second mortgage on the house to pay the hush money. The debt I had been killing myself to pay off for 3 years, the promotion I had turned down, the 80-hour work weeks, It wasn't to save my parents' home from an economic downturn. It was to keep my golden child brother out of a federal prison. I gripped the edges of the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. They had lied to me. Every time I handed over a check, every time my dad looked at me with resentment, every time my mom begged me to keep helping the family, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were using my blood, sweat, and future to subsidize Cameron's crimes. A cold, dark fury settled over me. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was ice. I carefully placed the documents back into the red folder, put the folder exactly where I found it, and locked the cabinet. I wiped my fingerprints off the desk. They thought I was their obedient, naive ATM. They had no idea they had just handed me the match to burn their entire lie to the ground. I couldn't just leave after finding that folder. I needed to look one of them in the eye and see if there was a shred of guilt, a single ounce of remorse for what they had done to me. I chose my mother. She was the one who always played the peacemaker, the one who cried and begged and manipulated my emotions using the sacred bond of family. I waited in the kitchen until I heard the garage door open. My mom walked in alone, carrying a small bag of groceries. She looked surprised to see me sitting at the island. "Elijah? I didn't know you were coming over. Your father went to the hardware store." "I know," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I waited until he left. We need to talk, Mom." She set the groceries down, her maternal instincts sensing the shift in my demeanor. "What is it? Are you okay? Did something happen at work?" "I was looking for some old tax documents in Dad's office," I lied smoothly. "I couldn't find them, but I found the red folder in the bottom drawer instead. The settlement papers." Her face drained of all color. It was instantaneous. The warm, welcoming motherly facade shattered, revealing sheer panic underneath. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Elijah, you shouldn't have been in there. You lied to me," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "For 3 years. You watched me give up a promotion, move into a shoebox, and work myself into the ground, and you told me it was because Dad's business failed. But it was Cameron. He committed fraud, and you mortgaged this house to pay off his victims." Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. It was her default defense mechanism. "You don't understand. He was young, he got mixed up with Dylan, he didn't know what he was doing. If those people went to the police, his life would have been ruined. He would have gone to jail." "So you ruined my life instead?" I asked. "We didn't ruin your life," she cried, stepping toward me, her hands pleading. "You're smart. You're capable. You always figure things out. Cameron isn't like you. He's fragile. He makes mistakes. He's your brother, Elijah. We had to protect him. We're a family." "You protected a criminal," I said coldly, "and you made me pay the ransom. Did you ever, for 1 second, think about what this was doing to me?" She stopped crying. The tears were gone, replaced by a hard, desperate calculation. "We did what we had to do," she whispered fiercely. "And you're going to keep paying the mortgage, Elijah. Because if you stop, the house is gone, and the stress will kill your father. You can't do that to us. You're the responsible one." I stared at her. I really looked at the woman who gave birth to me. There was no love in her eyes. There was only necessity. I wasn't a son to her. I was a utility, a shield to throw in front of her precious Cameron. "You're right, Mom," I said softly, standing up. "I am the responsible one." I walked past her, out the door, and into the crisp air. The last shred of guilt I carried, the lingering doubt that maybe I owed them something because they raised me, evaporated completely. They had made their choice. They chose Cameron. Now I was going to choose myself, and I was going to make sure that when the house of cards finally collapsed, I wouldn't be standing underneath it. The very next morning, I walked into the corporate office and went straight to the employee cafeteria. I scanned the room and found Sarah sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee and reviewing a spreadsheet. Sarah was brilliant, ruthless, and entirely underappreciated by the senior partners. She was the only person at the firm who knew Julian had stolen my model, and she was the only person I trusted. I slid into the booth across from her. "I need your help, and I need a partner." She didn't look up from her screen immediately. "I'm listening." Julian stealing my model was a wake-up call. The firm is never going to give us the credit or the equity we deserve. We're just billable hours to them. I'm starting my own consulting firm, a shadow firm for now. We operate quietly, poaching mid-tier clients the firm ignores. When we're big enough, we leave and take the accounts with us. Sarah finally closed her laptop and looked at me, her eyes sharp and assessing. "A shadow firm, while working 80 hours a week here, and you want me to co-found it. You handle the operational logistics, the legal structure, and client acquisition. I'll handle the strategy, the financial modeling, and the execution. We split everything 50-50. You know I'm the best analyst here, Sarah. And I know you're the best closer." A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "I like a man with a vendetta. What's the catch?" "The catch is we do not sleep for the next 18 months, I said. That was the beginning of the most grueling, exhilarating period of my life. By day, I was the obedient corporate drone, churning out reports and keeping my head down, letting Julian take the spotlight while I gathered intelligence. By night, I was sitting in Sarah's cramped apartment, drinking awful instant coffee, building our empire brick by brick. We called the firm Aegis Consulting. We started small, offering cut-rate restructuring audits to struggling local businesses. We worked from midnight until 4 a.m., slept for 2 hours, and then went to our day jobs. It was torture, but the success was intoxicating. Because I was no longer putting all my emotional energy into saving my toxic family, I poured every ounce of my aggression and intelligence into Aegis. We were ruthless. We found inefficiencies in companies that older, bloated consulting firms missed. Word of mouth spread. Within a year, we weren't taking mid-tier clients anymore. We were bidding against our own corporate employer for regional contracts. All the while, I kept up the charade at home. I continued to transfer the exact amount for the mortgage every month. I drove my beat-up car. I wore the same cheap suits. Whenever I visited my parents, I played the part of the exhausted, miserable son perfectly. My dad still treated me with disdain, my mom still coddled Cameron, and Cameron was still failing upward, having recently landed a middle management job at a massive logistics and shipping corporation through one of his sleazy networking connections. They thought they had me trapped in a cage of obligation. They had no idea I had already picked the lock, built a fortress outside, and was simply waiting for the perfect moment to step out and lock the door behind me. 18 months after Sarah and I shook hands in the cafeteria, the moment that would define the rest of my life finally arrived. Aegis Consulting had grown massive. We had officially quit our day jobs 6 months prior, taking 3 major clients with us. Julian had tried to sue us, but Sarah had ironclad NDAs and non-competes that left him powerless. We were operating out of a sleek, high-rise office downtown, generating revenue I previously thought was impossible. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah walked into my corner office and dropped a massive, leather-bound dossier onto my desk. Her eyes were gleaming with a predatory excitement. "We got it," she said, tapping the heavy binder. "The Vanguard Logistics contract. They just signed." I stared at the dossier, a slow, deep breath filling my lungs. Vanguard Logistics wasn't just any company. It was a massive, bloated regional shipping conglomerate that was hemorrhaging money due to severe internal corruption and mismanagement. The board of directors had fired the old CEO and brought in a ruthless turnaround specialist, Mr. Sterling. Sterling had hired Aegis Consulting to come in, audit every single department, and execute a massive, merciless restructuring plan. We had total authority to slash budgets, close divisions, and fire anyone we deemed redundant or toxic. But that wasn't why my heart was pounding. Vanguard Logistics was the company where Cameron worked. He had spent the last year bragging at family dinners about his cushy title as Director of Regional Optimization, a made-up role that essentially allowed him to play golf on company time and expense lavish lunches. Did they hand over the internal personnel files yet? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Sarah grinned, opening the dossier and pulling out a flash drive. Everything. Payroll, expense reports, internal emails, performance reviews. Sterling gave us the keys to the kingdom. He wants a list of terminal cuts by the end of the month. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The screen populated with thousands of files. I opened the payroll directory and typed a single name into the search bar. Cameron. There he was. I clicked on his file and spent the next hour reviewing his work. It was worse than I thought. Not only was he entirely incompetent, but he was actively embezzling money through falsified vendor invoices, funneling company funds to a dummy LLC registered under Dylan's name. It was the exact same scam he had pulled years ago, just on a corporate scale. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The universe had a wicked sense of humor. My parents had stolen my college fund, destroyed my early career, and mortgaged their home to protect Cameron from the consequences of his actions. And now, the company paying Cameron's unearned salary had just hired me, at a premium rate, to be the executioner. I held the axe, and I knew exactly where I was going to swing it. Draft the initial termination list, I told Sarah, not looking away from the screen, and flag Cameron's department for a full forensic audit. I want every stolen cent documented before we hand him over to Sterling. The storm wasn't just coming anymore. I was the storm, and it was about to make landfall. Despite the massive success of Aegis Consulting, I maintained absolute secrecy about my wealth. I didn't want my family to know I had money, because the second they found out, the emotional blackmail would escalate from paying a mortgage to funding their entire lavish lifestyle. I needed to cut the cord cleanly on my own terms. But I did allow myself 2 indulgences. The first was a house. I hired Chloe, a discreet and highly effective real estate agent, to find me a property far away from the suburbs where my parents lived. She found a stunning, modern home nestled in the hills, surrounded by trees, with a massive garage and floor-to-ceiling windows. I bought it in cash under an LLC to keep my name off public records. It was empty, quiet, and entirely mine. The second indulgence was a car. I walked into a high-end dealership downtown, wearing a sharp tailored suit, and pointed at the showroom floor. A sleek, midnight black Porsche 911 Carrera. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a symbol of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. I paid for it, took the keys, and felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. But I couldn't drive it to my parents' house. It would blow my cover instantly. So I devised a system. I parked the Porsche in the secure, climate-controlled garage at Sarah's apartment building. Whenever I had to visit my family to maintain the illusion, I would take an Uber to Sarah's, switch keys, and drive my rusted, sputtering Honda Civic out to the suburbs. It was an absurd double life. During the week, I was a high-powered CEO, commanding boardrooms and dictating the fate of massive corporations, driving a supercar through the city at midnight. On Sunday afternoons, I was the defeated, exhausted son, pulling up to my parents' driveway in a car that sounded like a dying lawnmower, walking in to endure my father's sneers and my mother's fake pity. "You're a masochist?" Sarah told me one evening, watching me toss the Porsche keys onto her counter and pick up the tarnished Honda key. "You have millions in the bank, and you're still going over there to let them treat you like garbage. Why don't you just stop sending the checks and ghost them?" "Because ghosting is too easy," I replied, zipping up my cheap jacket. "If I just disappear, they'll spin a narrative where I'm the ungrateful son who abandoned them. They'll play the victim forever. I need them to pull the trigger themselves. I need them to push me out so they can never, ever claim I didn't do everything I could. I needed the finale to be undeniable. I needed my father's arrogance to be his own undoing. I just didn't realize how quickly and how spectacularly the universe was going to hand me the perfect setup." I drove the clunker out to the suburbs, the engine whining in protest on the highway. I parked in the driveway, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door, preparing myself for another evening of subtle insults. I had no idea that tonight was the night the bomb was finally going to detonate. The atmosphere inside the house was thick with a frantic, desperate energy before I even took my shoes off. Usually, Sunday dinners were filled with the dull hum of the TV and Cameron talking loudly about himself. Tonight it was chaotic. My mom was pacing the kitchen, chewing her fingernails. Cameron was sitting on the couch, aggressively tapping his foot, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked pale, sweating profusely through his shirt. My dad was standing by the window, peering out into the street like he was expecting the FBI to roll up. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my keys on the console table. "It's Cameron's company," my mom whispered, rushing over to me and grabbing my arm. "Vanguard Logistics. They brought in some horrible, vicious consulting firm to restructure the whole place. They're firing people left and right. Whole departments are just gone. Cameron heard a rumor today that his division is on the chopping block." I kept my face completely blank, masking the surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Really? That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" my dad snapped, turning away from the window. "It's a disaster. He's a director. If he loses this job, he loses his apartment. He loses everything." "He'll find another job," I said calmly. "He has a great resume, right?" Cameron glared at me from the couch, hanging up his phone. "Shut up, Elijah. You don't know anything about corporate politics. The consultants they brought in are butchers. No one knows who the lead partner is, but the guy is a psycho. He's freezing accounts, auditing expenses. It's a bloodbath." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from smiling. The psycho butcher was standing right in their living room, wearing a $20 sweater from a discount rack. The panic in the room was palpable because they all knew the truth. If Cameron got audited, he wasn't just going to get fired. He was going to jail for embezzlement. And my parents couldn't take out a third mortgage to save him this time. They were trapped. In a state of sheer, blind desperation, my dad had done the only thing a man who refuses to take responsibility can do. He had gone to the corner store and bought $50 worth of lottery tickets for the massive state jackpot being drawn that night. "If I hit this," my dad muttered, pacing the floor, clutching a stack of tickets. "If I hit this, everything is solved. We pay off the house, we set Cameron up with his own business, and we're done." He didn't mention me. In his fantasy of sudden wealth, I didn't exist. I was just the heavy burden he could finally drop. Later that evening, after the news announced the winning numbers, the house descended into an eerie silence. I was in the kitchen, washing my plate, preparing to leave and drive my terrible car back to the city. That was when my dad walked in, his eyes wide, staring at a single ticket in his hand. The TV was blaring the replay of the draw. He looked at the ticket. He looked at the TV. Then he looked at me. The desperate panic in his eyes vanished, instantly replaced by a towering, monstrous arrogance. He had checked the numbers. He thought he had won. And that brings us right back to the beginning. The moment he slapped that ticket on the counter, looked me dead in the eye, and told me to get my dirty money out of his house. He had just fired his only lifeline, entirely convinced he was a millionaire. And I was standing there, looking at a ticket that had expired 7 days ago. He pointed his thick finger directly at the front door. "I am absolutely serious. Get your things, take your dirty money, and get out of my house. I am done looking at you. I am done pretending we need you." I stood there on the linoleum floor of the kitchen I had been paying for. I looked at the small, flimsy piece of paper in my hand, the supposed golden ticket. I looked at the television screen in the living room, which was still showing the flashing graphics of the live lottery draw. Then, I looked down at his smartphone resting on the granite counter, displaying the local news article about the massive jackpot. The disconnect between his reality and actual reality was so massive it was almost beautiful. "You want me to leave?" I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of the panic or the tears he was so desperately hoping to see. "Tonight," my dad barked. He puffed out his chest, looking like a king who had just conquered a new land. "I'm a millionaire now. I don't need your condescending attitude. I don't need your little monthly handouts. Cameron and your mother and I are going to be just fine. My mom was standing by the sink. She had a strange, tight smile on her face. She didn't say a word to defend me. She was already mentally spending the money, probably picking out the color of the new sports car they were going to buy Cameron. My brother was leaning back on the couch, not even bothering to hide his smug grin. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the house suddenly felt very thin. "Okay," I said. "I'll go." My dad crossed his arms over his chest. "Good. Don't let the door hit you." "But before I pack my bags," I said, stepping closer to the kitchen island and laying the ticket down flat under the bright overhead lights, "I think you need to take a closer look at this." He scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. "I checked the numbers 3 times, Elijah. Every single one matches the draw on the TV. You can't ruin this for me. You can't talk your way out of the fact that I am richer than you will ever be." "I'm not talking about the numbers, Dad," I said quietly. I reached out and tapped my index finger against the top right corner of the glossy paper. "I'm talking about the date." He frowned. The supreme arrogance flickered, just for a fraction of a second, replaced by a tiny spark of confusion. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, squinting at the spot my finger was pointing to. "What about it?" he snapped. "The jackpot they announced this morning, the one on your phone," I explained, speaking slowly and clearly as if I were talking to a very stubborn child, "is for the drawing happening tonight. The numbers on the television right now are for tonight's draw." "I know that," he yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Right?" I continued, not breaking eye contact. "But the ticket you are holding in your hand, the one you bought from the corner store this afternoon, it's a ticket for the drawing that took place last week." Silence fell over the kitchen. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator and the overly enthusiastic voice of the lottery announcer on the television in the other room. My dad's eyes darted from the ticket to my face, then back to the ticket. He snatched it off the counter and shoved it inches from his face. His lips moved silently as he read the tiny, black-printed date next to the barcode. "No," he muttered. "No, that's not right. The guy at the register gave me the wrong one. He printed the wrong ticket." "The machine prints what you ask for, Dad," I said. "You bought a ticket for a drawing that already happened. Your numbers match tonight's draw, but your ticket is completely useless. It's garbage. You didn't win anything." Martha let out a sharp gasp, dropping the dish towel she had been holding. It hit the floor with a soft thud. "Robert, what is he talking about? Tell him he's lying." My dad didn't answer her. His hands started to shake. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. He grabbed his phone from the counter, his fingers fumbling clumsily across the screen as he tried to pull up the official state lottery website. He typed in the numbers. He checked the dates. He refreshed the page. He did it again and again. I just watched him. I watched the fantasy of his unearned wealth evaporate into thin air. I watched the realization wash over him that he was still the same man, with the same crushing debt, living in the same house he couldn't afford. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone. His shoulders just slumped, dropping entirely as the last ounce of fight left his body. He stared blankly at the screen. "I need to be sure," he whispered. It was a pathetic, broken sound. He turned around, grabbed his heavy winter coat off the hook by the back door, and walked out without another word. The door slammed shut behind him. He was going to the corner store to use the scanner. He needed a machine to tell him what I had already proven. My mom rushed over to the island, picking up the ticket my dad had dropped. She stared at it, her eyes wide with mounting terror. Cameron had finally gotten off the couch and walked into the kitchen. The smug grin was completely gone, replaced by a look of absolute panic. "Is he right?" Cameron asked my mom, his voice trembling. "Did Dad screw it up?" Martha didn't answer. She just covered her mouth with her hand and started to cry. I didn't stay in the kitchen to watch the meltdown. I walked down the hall to the small, cramped guest bedroom where I kept a few changes of clothes for the nights I worked too late to drive back to the city. I pulled my duffel bag out of the closet and started packing. I folded my shirts perfectly. I packed my toiletries. I was in no rush. For the first time in 3 years, I felt incredibly light. The invisible chains of obligation that had bound me to this house were finally broken. He had fired me. He had told me to leave. I was just following his orders. An hour passed. I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, fully packed, staring at the wall. Then, I heard the heavy rumble of my dad's truck pulling into the driveway. The engine cut off. The front door opened and closed heavily. Heavy footsteps dragged across the hardwood floor into the kitchen. I grabbed my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked down the hallway. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table. His coat was still on. He was staring at his empty hands. The store clerk had confirmed it. The ticket was a loser, not a single dime. The silence in the room was deafening. Martha was sitting across from him, her face pale and tear-stained. Cameron was pacing back and forth near the refrigerator, chewing on his thumbnail. When I walked into the room with my bag, they all froze. My dad looked up at me. The arrogance was completely gone. The hatred was gone. The only thing left in his eyes was pure, unfiltered fear. He saw the bag on my shoulder and realized exactly what was happening. His pride had just cost him the only thing keeping him out of bankruptcy. He cleared his throat. It sounded like sandpaper. Elijah. I stopped walking. Yeah. He looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Listen. About earlier. I was excited. People say things they don't mean when they get worked up. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is, I said. He forced a weak, sickeningly fake smile. You don't have to leave. Your mom and we talked about it. This is your home. You belong here with us. You told me to take my dirty money and get out. I reminded him, my voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. You said you didn't need my help anymore. You were very clear. I made a mistake, he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. Okay? Is that what you want to hear? I messed up. The ticket is useless. If you leave, we lose the house. Vance will be here by the end of the month. You can't just abandon your family over a stupid argument. It wasn't an argument, I said, adjusting the strap of my bag. It was the truth. You finally told me exactly how you feel about me. You resent me because I'm the one bailing you out. You hate my money, but you love spending it. You chose Cameron's crimes over my future, and you expected me to just swallow it forever. Martha stood up, rushing toward me, her hands reaching out to grab my arm. Elijah, please, don't do this. Think about your brother. Vanguard Logistics is restructuring. He might lose his job this week. If you stop paying the mortgage, he'll be homeless. We'll all be homeless. Have some compassion. Before I could respond to her pathetic plea, the front door violently burst open. Cameron's sleazy friend, Dylan, wasn't there to save him this time. Cameron stood in the doorway, completely out of breath. His tie was loosened, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and his face was entirely flushed. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon while having a panic attack. He stumbled into the living room, ignoring my mom, ignoring my dad, and collapsed onto the couch. He buried his face in his hands and let out a loud, wretched sob. Cameron! Martha shrieked, abandoning me and running to her golden child. Honey, what is it? What happened? Cameron looked up, his face slick with sweat and tears. He was hyperventilating. I'm done. It's over. They fired me. They fired my whole department. My dad stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. What do you mean they fired you? You're a director. It doesn't matter, Cameron yelled, his voice bordering on hysterical. The consultants, Aegis Consulting, they came in today. They froze all my corporate accounts. They seized my laptop. They had security escort me out of the building in front of everyone. They can't do that, Martha cried, rubbing his shoulders. We'll get a lawyer. We'll sue them for wrongful termination. We can't get a lawyer, Mom, Cameron screamed, pushing her hands away. They didn't just fire me. They audited my vendor accounts. They found the dummy LLC. They found the money I was funneling to Dylan. The lead partner of Aegis, whoever this psycho is, he blacklisted me. He handed the file over to the corporate legal team. Vanguard is pressing charges. They're coming after me for everything. The room spun. My dad fell back into his chair, gripping his chest. My mom started wailing. The absolute worst-case scenario had just landed squarely in their laps. Cameron wasn't just unemployed. He was facing a massive corporate lawsuit and potential federal prison time for embezzlement. Again. And this time, there was no house equity left to bail him out. Who did this? My dad demanded, his face purple with rage. Who is the lead partner of this Aegis firm? Give me a name. I'll go down there myself and tear him apart. I stood by the kitchen island, watching the chaos unfold. The moment was so perfect, so incredibly satisfying, that I almost felt bad for how much I was enjoying it. Almost. I reached into the inner pocket of my cheap, faded jacket. I pulled out a heavy, matte black card holder. I snapped it open and pulled out a single, thick, gold-foiled business card. I walked over to the coffee table in the living room. Cameron was shaking, staring blankly at the floor. My parents were screaming at each other about finding a lawyer. I tossed the business card onto the glass table. It landed with a sharp, heavy clink that cut through the noise. Cameron's eyes darted to the card. He leaned forward. He read the embossed gold lettering. Elijah Senior Managing Partner Aegis Consulting Group. Cameron stopped breathing. He stared at the card, then slowly, agonizingly, raised his head to look at me. The confusion in his eyes morphed into sheer, unadulterated terror. You, he whispered, his voice cracking. It was you. My dad stopped yelling. He looked at Cameron, then looked at the card on the table. He snatched it up, reading it. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. What is this? This is a joke. This is a sick joke. It's not a joke, I said smoothly. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed a number. I put it on speakerphone and set it next to the business card. It rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Elijah, tell me you have good news regarding the Vanguard audit. I do, Mr. Sterling, I said, watching my family's faces turn to stone. The Regional Optimization Department has been completely liquidated. The embezzled funds have been traced, and the termination of the regional director was executed successfully. Excellent work, Elijah, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics said through the speaker. Your firm is worth every penny. Have your legal team send over the prosecution files by morning. We're going to bury that thief. Consider it done. Have a good evening, Mr. Sterling. I ended the call. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of total destruction. They realized all at once that the son they had treated like a doormat, the son they had robbed and discarded, was the one holding the axe over their heads. You destroyed my life? Cameron whispered, tears streaming down his face. No, Cameron, I said, looking down at him. You destroyed your own life. I just provided the receipts. I turned to my parents, who were frozen in place, staring at me like I was a stranger. You wanted me out of your house. You didn't want my dirty money. You got your wish. Good luck with the mortgage. Good luck with the lawyers. I turned my back on them, grabbed my duffel bag, and walked toward the front door. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The feeling of the heavy, toxic atmosphere of that house leaving my lungs was intoxicating. I walked down the driveway toward the street. My beat-up Honda Civic was parked by the curb, exactly where I had left it. But right behind it, idling smoothly under the warm glow of the street lamp, was a sleek, midnight black Porsche 911 Carrera. The driver's side window rolled down. Sarah was sitting behind the wheel, wearing dark sunglasses despite the fact that it was 10 o'clock at night. She rested her elbow on the door frame and flashed me a razor-sharp grin. "Delivery for the senior managing partner," she called out. I walked over, tossed my duffel bag into the small trunk, and walked around to the driver's side. Sarah climbed over the center console into the passenger seat, leaving the wheel to me. Just as I opened the heavy, engineered door of the Porsche, I heard the front door of the house crash open. My dad, my mom, and Cameron spilled out onto the front porch. They had snapped out of their shock and chased after me, probably to beg, scream, or threaten me. But they all stopped dead in their tracks the second they saw what I was standing next to. My dad's jaw actually dropped. He was a car guy. He knew exactly what a 911 Carrera cost. He looked at the Porsche, then looked at my rusted Honda, then looked at my tailored suit, finally understanding the massive, elaborate illusion I had maintained for years. "Elijah!" my mom screamed, running halfway down the lawn, her arms flailing. "Elijah, wait. We can fix this. We're family. You can't just leave us like this." I stood by the open door of the Porsche. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old, brass key to their front door. The key to the house I had saved from foreclosure. The key I would never use again. I didn't say a word. I just tossed the key onto the concrete driveway. It landed with a sharp clink, bouncing once before settling near the tires of my old Honda. I slid into the low, leather bucket seat of the Porsche. I grabbed the door handle and pulled it shut. The heavy thud cut off the sound of my mother's hysterical sobbing. I turned the ignition. The flat-six engine roared to life, a deep, aggressive growl that shook the pavement. I shifted into gear, hit the gas, and left them standing in the glow of the taillights, a pathetic portrait of a ruined family. As we sped down the highway toward the city, Sarah looked over at me. "So, how did it feel?" I kept my eyes on the road, feeling the immense power of the car beneath me. It felt like waking up from a really long nightmare. The fallout was rapid and entirely merciless. I didn't answer any phone calls. I blocked my parents' numbers. I blocked Cameron. I blocked Aunt Clara. I completely severed the communication line. I moved into my new house in the hills, focused on running Aegis Consulting, and watched the collateral damage unfold from a very comfortable distance. Exactly 2 weeks after I left, on a gloomy Tuesday morning, the inevitable happened. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing a quarterly report, when my private cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code belonged to my old hometown. I let it ring 3 times before picking it up. "Hello, Elijah." "Oh, thank God you picked up." It was my mother. She sounded completely unhinged, her voice hoarse from crying. She must have borrowed a neighbor's phone to bypass my block. "Make it fast, Martha," I said coldly. "He's here," she sobbed, the panic radiating through the phone. "Mr. Vance is here. He's standing on the front porch with the bank representatives. They're posting the foreclosure notice on the door. Elijah, they're taking the house. You missed the payment." "I didn't miss the payment," I corrected her. "I stopped making it. There's a difference." "You can't do this," she screamed. "Your father is having chest pains. Cameron is locked in his room because Vanguard's legal team officially filed the lawsuit this morning. He needs a criminal defense lawyer. Elijah, the retainer is $50,000. We have nothing. You have all that money, you have a Porsche, you own that company. You have to save your brother. Even now." Even while standing on the porch of the house she was losing, her primary concern was Cameron. The delusion was absolute. "You made your choice 3 years ago," I said, my voice steady and completely void of sympathy. You chose to protect Cameron's fraud over my future. You took my college fund. You took my car money. You took my salary. You chose Cameron. Now you get to deal with the consequences of your golden child. Please, we're your family. You're a financial liability, I said, and I just cut my losses. Don't call this number again. I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. I stood up, walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window of my office, and looked out at the rolling green hills. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely safe. The storm had finally passed, and the wreckage they were dealing with was entirely their own creation. 6 months is a long time in the corporate world, but it's an eternity when your life is rapidly disintegrating. I heard about the final collapse of my family through the grapevine. Despite my best efforts to cut all ties, information has a funny way of finding you, especially when you have neighbors who live for neighborhood gossip. Mrs. Higgins, an older woman who lived 3 houses down from my parents, somehow tracked down my new business address and sent me a long, rambling email detailing the spectacular crash and burn of the neighborhood's most arrogant family. The bank didn't hesitate. Without my monthly cashier's checks, Mr. Vance executed the foreclosure swiftly. My parents were evicted. They had to sell their remaining furniture just to afford the deposit on a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. The stress of losing everything, the public humiliation, and the absolute destruction of his ego finally broke my father. According to Mrs. Higgins, the shouting matches were so loud the police were called twice, and ultimately, the tension led to a bitter, nasty divorce. My dad moved out, taking whatever scraps of pride he had left, and my mom was left alone to deal with the mess. As for Cameron, his charm finally ran out. Vanguard Logistics was ruthless. Their corporate lawyers buried him. When he realized he was facing real prison time, he tried to throw Dylan under the bus to get a plea deal. But Dylan, the fake lawyer, was already gone. He had drained their dummy LLC accounts and fled the state the moment he heard Aegis Consulting was auditing Vanguard. Cameron was left holding the bag. He was currently awaiting trial, working a minimum wage job washing dishes to pay off a public defender, because his parents couldn't afford a real lawyer. Meanwhile, Aegis Consulting had exploded. Sarah and I were untouchable. We had secured contracts with 3 international conglomerates. I had paid off the last of my student loans. My house was fully furnished, and I was genuinely happy. I wasn't waking up with a tight chest anymore. I wasn't checking my bank account to see if I had enough left over for groceries after paying someone else's mortgage. I was free. I thought the book was completely closed on my family until a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was downtown, grabbing a coffee before a meeting, when I heard a familiar, shrill voice call my name. Elijah? Well, I'll be. Look at you in that expensive suit. I turned around to see Aunt Clara standing by the pastry case. She looked older, more tired, and the usual smug superiority she carried was noticeably absent. The family's collapse had hit her social standing hard. She no longer had Cameron's fake success to brag about. I gave her a tight, polite nod. Hello, Clara. I'm in a rush. Just a minute, she said, stepping closer, lowering her voice like she was about to share a state secret. I know you don't talk to your mother anymore. Frankly, after the divorce, nobody really does. She's become impossible. But there's something you should know. Something that's been eating at me. I didn't want to hear it, but morbid curiosity kept my feet planted. What? Clara looked around the coffee shop, then leaned in. That night. The night your father thought he won the lottery and kicked you out. You know he bought that ticket in the afternoon, right? I know. Well, Clara whispered, her eyes wide. Martha told me what happened before you got there. Your father left the ticket on the kitchen counter when he went to take a shower. Martha looked at it. She saw the date. She knew it was from the previous week's draw before the numbers were even announced. I froze. The ambient noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. She knew the ticket was fake? Clara nodded slowly. She knew, but she didn't tell Robert. She told me she stayed quiet on purpose. She knew Robert hated you, and she knew if he thought he was a millionaire, the first thing he would do is throw you out of the house. She wanted you gone, Elijah. A cold, heavy realization settled over me. Why? Because of Cameron's lawsuit, Clara said grimly. She knew Vanguard was coming after him. If you were still in the house, you would demand they use the lottery money to pay you back for the mortgage. She wanted Robert to kick you out so she could convince him to give the entire jackpot to Cameron for his legal defense. She let him humiliate you. She let him kick you to the curb, all to secure the bag for her golden boy. The sheer, calculated malice of it took my breath away. It wasn't just my father's blind arrogance. It was my mother's predatory greed. She was willing to let me be thrown onto the street just to monopolize a fortune that didn't even exist. I let out a low, humorless laugh. It was the final puzzle piece, the absolute confirmation that I had made the right choice. "Thank you for telling me, Clara," I said softly. "I just thought you should know," she murmured, looking down at her coffee. "You were the only good thing in that family, Elijah, and they threw you away." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop into the rain. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The bridge wasn't just burned. The ashes had been scattered to the wind. That weekend, I threw a housewarming party. It wasn't a massive, loud corporate event. It was small, intimate, and perfect. I hired a private chef to cater in my new, sprawling kitchen. The floor-to-ceiling windows were open, letting in the cool evening breeze and the view of the city lights below. Sarah was there, laughing and drinking expensive wine on the patio. Chloe, the real estate agent who helped me find the house, was chatting with some of the junior analysts from Aegis. Even Mr. Sterling from Vanguard Logistics stopped by for an hour, shaking my hand and thanking me again for saving his company from the rot inside it. I stood by the kitchen island, holding a glass of bourbon, watching the people in my home. There was no tension. There was no one demanding my money. There was no one comparing me to someone else or belittling my achievements. These people respected me. They valued my intelligence, my hard work, and my loyalty. Sarah walked over, clinking her wine glass against my tumbler. "You've got a nice setup here, boss. Beats the hell out of that tiny rented room in the suburbs." "Yeah," I smiled, taking a sip of the bourbon. "It does." "You ever miss them?" she asked quietly, her sharp eyes studying my face. I looked out at the city lights. I thought about the empty, dark house where my parents used to live. I thought about Cameron washing dishes. I thought about my mother's desperate, greedy silence. "No," I said honestly. "I don't miss them at all. I just regret that it took me so long to realize that family isn't determined by blood. It's determined by respect." Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "Well, welcome home, Elijah." Later that night, after the last guest had left and the house was perfectly quiet, I walked out into the massive, pristine garage. The midnight black Porsche was gleaming under the LED lights. I leaned against the cold metal of the hood, crossing my arms, and let the silence wash over me. For a long time, I believed that my worth was tied to my utility. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, and bled enough for the people who shared my last name, they would eventually love me. I accepted their disrespect because I thought it was the price of admission to a family. I was wrong. Sacrificing yourself for people who view you as an ATM isn't loyalty. It's self-destruction. The day my father slapped that worthless lottery ticket on the counter and told me to get out was the greatest gift he ever gave me. He didn't just kick me out of his house. He kicked me out of my own delusion. He forced me to see the ugly, undeniable truth. Now I own my own company. I own my own home. I drive the car of my dreams. But the most valuable thing I own is my self-respect. Nobody dictates my worth anymore. Nobody takes credit for my hard work. And nobody, absolutely nobody, gets to call my success dirty while living off the fruits of my labor. I took back the steering wheel of my life, and I haven't looked in the rearview mirror since. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It was a long, brutal road to get here, but looking back, I wouldn't change a single thing because it made me who I am today. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, pouring everything you have into people who only take and never give? How did you finally break free? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, I have a special request for the 1% Club. If you are one of the amazing people who stayed with me until the very end of this video, drop the letter W in the comments. W stands for winner, because recognizing your own worth and walking away from toxicity makes you a winner in my book, and I want to see how many of you are out there. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about navigating the crazy, complicated mess of life and corporate survival, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We've got a lot more to talk about. Until next time, stay strong, know your value, and don't let anyone treat you like a backup plan.